Hi, this is Doug Morrison, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Teach for Effect. Last time, we looked at the learning factor of readiness, that a student has to be mentally, physically, and emotionally ready to learn before you start to teach. If you don't make sure of that, you may as well start teaching before your students arrive. You'll have the same effect. If you missed that video, please check it out. I've posted a link in the description below this video. Today, we're going to look at another important factor in your students' learning, which is the learning factor of recency. Now, the learning factor of recency states that the last things learned and practiced are remembered the best. You can use this to your advantage by summarizing the most important points at the end of each of your lessons. If you're teaching a practical skill, then you'll want to have your students practice that skill at the end of the lesson. And if your next lesson builds on the previous one, then begin the next lesson with a review of the major points that they need to know to pick up the new skills you're about to teach. As I said, in most cases, the last things learned are the best remembered. Of course, there's a flip side to this fact. The more time passes, the less students are likely to remember what you taught. What this means is that you should review important facts and points very often. In fact, studies show that if new material is reviewed after 2, 7, and 21 days, that the student will retain about 70% of what you're teaching for life. The more often reviews are made, and the lesson is put to practical use, the more will be remembered, and the longer that learning will last. For example, if you use a skill or knowledge every day, you probably use it without even thinking about it. But attempt something that you haven't done in 30 years, and you'll soon find out that the skills are pretty rusty. You need some review. So, here are some practical ideas that you can put to use as you teach. First of all, plan on reviewing the important parts of a lesson prior to the student using it. This might mean using newly learned information to solve a problem or the practical use of a new skill. Regardless, make sure the student knows what they need to know before attempting it for the first time, or they could become very discouraged. When I was a flight instructor, as we were walking from the hangar out to the airplane, I'd always ask the student questions about what we were going to do and review the important things so that when we got out and actually performed the maneuver in the air, they were ready for it. Something else is to make sure your students receive a thorough summary of the important points or principles at the end of a lesson. Another great idea is ask questions at the end of each stage of the lesson. That way, you're sure that they're ready to move on to the next stage of the lesson. Also, conduct a test at the end of each of your lessons. Now, this doesn't have to be a formal test. You don't have to say, okay, class, put your books away, take out your pens and paper, we're going to have a test now. It could be as simple as just asking them to explain what they've learned or asking a few questions on some of the more important points. Now, keep in mind that as you're doing this, you'll be testing your own teaching as well. Now, if you're teaching a course that will be spread out over several weeks or months, you might want to take an entire lesson or at least a good portion of one lesson to perform a review on what's been learned so far, just to refresh everything. And finish your lesson with practice of important skills or knowledge. Now, don't get the idea that reviewing means you retell your students what you've already told them. While that's certainly better than not reviewing at all, there is a better way, and I've already mentioned it. That is, ask questions. And don't just ask questions that begin with what, such as, what are the steps to cutting a board to the proper length? Instead, make sure that you use questions that begin with how and why, because then you'll be testing not just their recall and their memory, but their understanding as well. If they have to explain it back to you and are able to do so, it really shows that they've learned. I'll be doing a video in the future that will be all about the proper way to ask questions, so stay tuned for that one. Let me ask you a question. Do you teach something that your students absolutely have to learn? Do you teach on a regular basis, maybe homeschool, Sunday school, or on the job? If you teach for any reason at all, then you know what a huge responsibility it is to properly instruct others. As a flight instructor, I was held accountable by Transport Canada for the success of my students. But even if I hadn't been, I would still have felt the pressure of having to ensure that what I was teaching was actually being learned. Over the years, I learned from other teachers, from books, from courses I took, from my own experience, and of course from trial and error. Through all that, I've developed the Teaching for Effect system. If you're serious about having an impact on the lives of your students, I know that it can be a huge help to you in your teaching. I can teach it one-on-one or in a group setting, either online or in person. Or, if you prefer, I also have an online course that you can study at your own pace. It comes complete with a workbook and homework assignments that will help you to introduce these principles into your own teaching. You can check out the course at the description below this video, or you can contact me at teachforeffect@gmail.com. Now, if you found these tips at all helpful, then please help me out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.